Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a subject that sparks a lot of curiosity and sometimes, well, quite a bit of controversy. Homeopathy.
That's right.
You've probably heard of it, maybe you know someone who uses it, but what's really behind this practice? We've got a pretty comprehensive set of info here, and our goal, together, is to get to the heart of it.
Exactly. We've gone through scientific articles, historical accounts, analyses from regulatory bodies, really trying to get a clear, objective view of what homeopathy claims, how it evolved, and crucially, what science says about whether it actually works.
Yeah, separating the wheat from the chaff so you can form your own opinion armed with, solid information. Our sources today cover the whole spectrum, really, from how it started right up to the current scientific debate. We'll dig into the core principles like that like-cures-like idea.
Similibus curentur.
Right, and those famous homeopathic dilutions. Brace yourself, because when we get into the dilutions, some of the numbers are truly mind-bending.
They really are.
Our mission's clear. Figure out the most important takeaways from these sources and lay it all out in a way that's easy to grasp and hopefully interesting. Okay, let's start at the beginning. Where did this all come from?
Okay, so homeopathy kicked off back in 1796. It was conceived by a German doctor, Samuel Hahnemann.
Hahnemann, right.
And what's fascinating is that it emerged as a reaction against the medicine of his time. He saw contemporary practices as, well, ineffective and often downright harmful.
Like bloodletting and that kind of thing.
Exactly, harsh stuff. Hahnemann advocated for using single drugs in much smaller doses, and he had this whole view of living organisms based on a sort of vital force.
Okay, so Hahnemann wasn't a fan of mainstream medicine back then, and that led to the central idea of homeopathy, this law of similars. How does that actually work?
Right, the core principle is like cures like, or similibus curentur in Latin. The story goes that Hahnemann got this idea while translating a medical text about cinchona bark.
Which was used for malaria, yeah.
Correct. He questioned the prevailing theory that cinchona worked because it was bitter, so he decided to experiment on himself. Took the bark. He reported experiencing symptoms similar to malaria fever, chills, that sort of thing. From this, he concluded that any effective drug must induce symptoms in a healthy person that resemble the disease it's meant to treat.
Huh. Interesting. So if something gives a healthy person a fever, it could potentially cure a fever in someone who's sick. That sounds a little strange, doesn't it?
Well, scientifically speaking, yes. This law of similars lacks a scientific basis and doesn't really hold up under the scientific method.
Okay.
Later studies showed cinchona works against malaria because of quinine, which actually kills the malaria parasite, a totally different mechanism than what Hahnemann proposed.
Right.
But based on his premise, Hahnemann started what he called provings.
Provings, what were those like?
Yeah.
Sounds like giving tiny bits of stuff to healthy folks and just watching.
Pretty much. Hahnemann would administer various substances to healthy volunteers. He'd ask them to keep detailed logs of every symptom they experienced, the conditions that brought them on. Sometimes this went on for months. And he published these compilations, these provings, detailing the supposed effects of different substances.
And then came the dilutions, which is maybe the most famous and controversial part of homeopathy, isn't it? Explain that bit. Why dilute things so much?
Okay, so Hahnemann believed that high doses of substances causing similar symptoms could actually make the illness worse.
Right, makes sense.
So he advocated for extreme dilutions. The idea was that this process would remove the harmful effects while preserving the therapeutic properties. He even thought dilution increased what he called the substance's spiritual medicinal powers.
Spiritual powers.
And between each dilution step, homeopaths often shake the mixture vigorously. That's called succussion. They claim this makes the diluent, the water or alcohol, remember the original substance.
Remember the substance. That already sounds a bit mystical for modern science, doesn't it? And what about those dilution scales we hear about, like 12C, 30C? What do the letters and numbers mean?
Right, there are three main scales. The centesimal scale, or C, which Hahnemann created. That's a 1 to 100 dilution at each step.
Okay, 1 to 100.
Then there's the decimal scale X or D, which is 1 to 10 dilution each time.
Got it.
And later in life, he developed the quintillamal scale, or Q, a 1 to 50,000 dilution.
Whoa.
So think C is diluting by 100 each time, X by 10, and Q is even more extreme. Just to give you an idea of scale, A 2C dilution means 1 part original substance in 10,000 parts solution.
Okay.
A 12C dilution is already considered around the reasonable limit, where you might still expect to find at least 1 molecule of the original substance.
Just 1 molecule at 12C.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And Hahnemann often used dilutions like 30C.
30C. But that's such an immense dilution. Surely there's basically 0 chance of any original molecule being left right.
Exactly. To put it in perspective, a 12C dilution is like putting a pinch of salt into the entire North and South Atlantic Oceans combined.
Wow. Okay.
And here's an even wilder one. Diluting 1/3 of a drop of an original substance in all the water on Earth gets you to about 13C.
That's incredible.
And a popular remedy called oscillocottinum, supposedly made from duck liver, is often sold at 200C. A 200C dilution would require something like 10 to the power of 320 universes worth of molecules just to statistically contain 1 original molecule in the final product.
My goodness. That's hard to even comprehend. And Hahnemann also had this theory about miasms explaining chronic diseases, right? What were those?
Yes. In his book, Organon of the Healing Art, he introduced this concept of miasms. He saw them as underlying infectious principles or peculiar morbid derangements of the vital force that caused chronic diseases.
Infectious principles.
Like
germs.
Sort of, but more. Conceptual. He linked specific miasms to specific diseases. He thought initial exposure caused local symptoms like skin issues or venereal diseases. His theory was if you suppress those symptoms with medicine, the underlying cause would go deeper and manifest as internal organ diseases.
Okay.
The original 3 miasms he proposed were psora, the itch, syphilis, venereal disease, and psychosis, genital warts. Psora was seen as the big one, linked to any itchy skin disease, but supposedly the root of many other conditions too: epilepsy, cancer, jaundice, deafness, cataracts, you name it.
So he thought these miasms were the real root causes.
That was his idea, yes.
Yeah.
Essentially, underlying infectious principles causing chronic illness.
Is that miasm theory still accepted in homeopathy today?
Interestingly, no. Hahnemann's miasm theory is still debated and pretty controversial, even within modern homeopathy. Yeah, critics say it was basically developed to prop up the system when treatments failed. They argue it doesn't adequately cover the vast range of diseases, and it doesn't account for things we now understand, like genetic predispositions, environmental factors, or a patient's unique history.
Gotcha. So homeopathy started with these principles, some of which, well, sound pretty questionable from today's scientific view. But what was its journey through history? Was it always this controversial?
Homeopathy actually hit its peak popularity in the 19th century. It arrived in the U.S. around 1825, and the first American homeopathic school opened in 1835.
So it took off quite quickly.
It did. Over that century, dozens of homeopathic institutions popped up in Europe and the U.S. By 1900, there were 22 homeopathic colleges and about 15,000 practitioners just in the States.
Wow, that's a lot. Why do you think it got so popular back then?
Well, one likely reason is that mainstream medicine at the time, as we mentioned, relied on often ineffective and even harmful treatments, bleeding, purging.
Right, the heroic medicine era.
Exactly. So in that context, patients treated by homeopaths often seemed to fare better, probably because the homeopathic remedies, while likely ineffective themselves, were rarely harmful. Plus, homeopathy seemed to have some success during infectious disease epidemics in the 19th century.
Like cholera.
Yeah, mortality rates in homeopathic hospitals during outbreaks like cholera were sometimes lower than in conventional hospitals, where the treatments themselves could actually be detrimental.
That's a really interesting historical perspective.
Yeah.
So compared to what else was on offer, it might not have seemed so bad. But were there critics even back then during its heyday?
Oh, absolutely. Even at its peak, homeopathy faced criticism from scientists and doctors. Sir John Forbes, Queen Victoria's physician, called the tiny doses an outrage to human reason back in 1843.
Strong words.
James Young Simpson in 1853 basically said no poison, however strong, would have any effect at the billionth or decillionth dilution. And the American physician and writer Oliver Wendell Holmes was also a fierce critic.
So the dilution thing was controversial from early on.
Very much so. And by the late 19th century, the practice started to decline. The last exclusively homeopathic school in the U.S. closed in 1920.
But then it saw a resurgence in the 20th century, didn't it? What drove that comeback? It's interesting how it dipped and then came back.
Well, according to some scholars, the Nazi regime in Germany actually favored homeopathy and funded research into it, though reportedly without finding positive results.
Really? Didn't know that.
In the US, it never totally vanished, but it saw a significant revival starting in the 1970s. Some homeopaths credit the work of a Greek homeopath, George Vithoulkas.
Okay.
Others link it more to the rise of the New Age movement and maybe what's sometimes called chemophobia, a sort of aversion to synthetic chemicals. Plus, homeopathic consultations were often longer, offering more personal attention, which could certainly appeal to patients.
Right, that personal touch. So, fast forward to the 21st century. Where does homeopathy stand with science now? Is the debate still raging?
Well, in the 21st century, a whole series of major meta-analyses have really solidified the scientific consensus. The therapeutic claims of homeopathy just aren't backed by solid scientific evidence.
So the big reviews aren't finding effects beyond placebo.
Largely no. As a result, you've seen numerous national and international bodies recommending that public funding for homeopathy in healthcare should be withdrawn.
Like who?
We're talking bodies in Australia, the UK, Switzerland, France, the European Academy's Science Advisory Council, the Russian Academy of Sciences. They've all concluded it's ineffective and shouldn't be funded.
And has that led to actual changes?
Yes. The NHS in England stopped funding homeopathic treatments and asked for them to be blacklisted for prescription. France removed funding in 2021. Spain announced moves to ban homeopathy and other pseudotherapies from health centers.
So a pretty clear trend from major scientific and health bodies. What about the core idea of the dilutions, that problem of no molecules being left? How does science view that plausibility?
Fundamentally, the entire basis of our scientific understanding, physics, chemistry, biochemistry, biology, contradicts homeopathy. The remedies are typically biochemically inert. They don't have a known effect on any disease.
Because they're so dilute.
Exactly. The extreme dilutions raise huge scientific plausibility issues. Avogadro's limit tells us that beyond a certain point, it's incredibly unlikely even one molecule of the original substance remains. Many homeopathic remedies go way beyond that limit.
And the water memory idea.
The claim that water somehow remembers the substance it once contained has never been scientifically proven. It's inconsistent with our understanding of physics and chemistry. Plus, the whole idea that more dilution makes it stronger flies in the face of basic pharmacology dose-response relationships,
Right. Normally, more drug means more effect, up to a point. So if there's no real pharmacological effect, how do you explain why some people feel homeopathy works for them?
That's a key question. There are several likely explanations. The placebo effect is a big one, the patient's belief in the treatment triggering a positive response.
The power of the mind, basically.
To some extent, yes. Also, the homeopathic consultation itself is often longer and more attentive than a standard doctor's visit. That process of being listened to can have its own therapeutic effect.
Feeling cared for?
Precisely. Then there's natural history. Many illnesses just get better on their own over time, and people might mistakenly credit the homeopathy.
Regression to the mean, too. If you seek help when symptoms are worst.
That's another factor, yes. Symptoms naturally fluctuate. Also, people might be using other unacknowledged conventional treatments at the same time. Or maybe they stopped a conventional treatment that had unpleasant side effects and feel better as a result, attributing it to the homeopathy.
Lots of potential factors, then.
And you also have to consider publication bias in homeopathy research studies. With positive findings might be more likely to get published than those showing no effect.
Okay. Shifting gears a bit, the remedies themselves, what are they actually made from, and how does a homeopath decide which one to give?
They're made from a huge range of sources: animal, vegetable, mineral, even synthetic substances. They're usually referred to by their Latin names, like arsenicum album, arsenic, natrum muriaticum, table salt, or lechisis muta, bushmaster snake venom.
Wow, arsenic and snake venom. Diluted way down, I assume?
Extremely diluted, yes. For prescribing, homeopaths mainly use two types of reference books. One is the Materia Medica, which is like a collection of detailed drug pictures, listing all the symptoms associated with each substance from those provings we talked about.
Okay.
The other is a repertory, which is essentially an index. You look up a specific symptom, and it lists the remedies supposedly related to it.
And what's a consultation actually like? Is it different from seeing a regular doctor?
Generally, yes. Homeopathic consultations tend to be much longer, anywhere from maybe 10 minutes, but often over an hour.
An hour.
Yeah. The patient is asked to describe in great detail their medical history, current symptoms, and what they call modalities. Things like how symptoms change with weather, time of day, position, etc. They also asked about mood, likes and dislikes, physical states, emotional states, life circumstances.
Very holistic, then.
That's the aim. All this information is then compared against the drug pictures in the materia medica or repertory to find the single remedy that best matches the patient's total symptom picture. That's classical homeopathy.
Is there another kind?
Yes. There's also what's called clinical homeopathy, where practitioners might use combination remedies based more directly on the diagnosed illness rather than the patient's unique totality of symptoms.
And are there other practices that grew out of homeopathy, like those flower remedies?
Yes, several. There's isopathy, where remedies are made from the products of disease itself, like secretions, pus, tissue samples. These are called nosodes. So-called homeopathic vaccines are a type of isopathy. Then there's tautopathy, using preparations made from drugs or vaccines someone took in the past, supposedly to counteract lingering ill effects. Again, no convincing scientific evidence for these.
Right.
You also have imponderables, remedies supposedly made not from substances, but from capturing things like X-rays or sunlight in alcohol or lactose.
Capturing sunlight. How?
The mechanism isn't scientifically clear. Then there's electrohomeopathy, claiming to extract therapeutic bioenergy from plants, also considered pseudoscience. And yes, flower preparations like the Bach flower remedies, made by placing flowers in water and exposing them to sunlight.
So quite a few offshoots. Given all this, what are the main concerns about homeopathy, particularly around safety and ethics?
Well, a major ethical concern is the potential for misleading patients, presenting homeopathy as an effective treatment when the scientific evidence is lacking. Some critics have called it a cruel deception.
Strong words again.
Regulatory bodies in places like the UK and Australia have taken action against misleading advertising claims. In terms of direct safety, while the extreme dilutions mean most remedies are inert, some do contain potentially toxic substances like belladonna or arsenic. There have been reports of adverse effects from improperly diluted or intentionally low dilution products. The FDA, for instance, warned about some homeopathic teething products for infants containing belladonna.
Okay, so direct harm is rare, but possible.
But perhaps the biggest risk is indirect. It's the danger of patients choosing homeopathy instead of evidence-based conventional medicine for serious conditions like cancer, heart disease, or infections.
Delaying effective treatment.
Exactly. Delaying diagnosis and proper treatment can lead to much worse outcomes, even death. And then there's the whole area of homeoprophylaxis, using homeopathy supposedly to prevent infectious diseases.
Instead of vaccines.
Yes. Actively discouraging vaccination or suggesting homeopathic nosodes can replace vaccines is extremely dangerous and puts individuals and communities at risk. There have even been cases of homeopaths advising travelers against taking anti-malarial drugs.
That's incredibly risky.
Okay.
So wrapping things up, how is homeopathy regulated around the world and how common is it?
Regulation is, well, all over the map. It varies hugely from country to country.
Like how?
In some European countries, like Scotland, it might still have some public funding or coverage, though that's decreasing. France and Luxembourg used to, but stopped. In others like Belgium or Austria, it's generally not covered. Germany is interesting. Many statutory health insurance plans cover it, but there's political pressure to change that.
What about the UK?
The NHS, as mentioned, doesn't recommend prescribing it anymore, though some prescriptions might still happen. Marketing claims are regulated.
And the EU, generally.
The EU requires homeopathic products to be registered, but crucially, they don't need to prove they actually work for that registration. Spain is pushing for tighter controls. Some countries like Bulgaria or Hungary only allow medical doctors to practice it.
How about outside Europe?
India. India is a major center. Homeopathy is officially recognized as one of their national systems of medicine under AYUSH. It's regulated, practitioners need a degree and registration. It's very widely used there.
And the US?
Regulation is mainly at the state level. The FDA held hearings, and the FTC now requires homeopathic claims to meet the same evidence standards as other health products, which they generally can't. The FDA is also moving away from its policy of generally not enforcing regulations against unapproved homeopathic drugs.
Canada. Australia.
Canada regulates them as natural health products, requiring a license. There was that case where they licensed a remedy for kids' flu that was literally just sugar water. Australia's Therapeutic Goods Administration oversees it, and their big review by the NHMRC found no reliable evidence of effectiveness, recommending pharmacy bans, though that wasn't adopted.
So, despite the scientific consensus, it's still pretty prevalent.
Oh, yeah. It's one of the most common forms of alternative medicine globally. The market is significant.
But
Germany, France, the US, India are big markets. It's even used in veterinary medicine.
homeopathy for animals.
Yes, which raises similar concerns about animal welfare, using ineffective treatments instead of proven ones. Major veterinary organizations generally advise against it.
Okay, quite the journey.
So we've reached the end of this deep dive into homeopathy. We've looked at its origins, those curious principles, its historical ups and downs, and most importantly, the critical lens of modern science.
Yeah?
The lack of robust scientific evidence for effectiveness and the sheer implausibility of its proposed mechanisms really raise significant questions about its role in health.
Absolutely. It's fascinating, isn't it, how a practice with such old roots still sparks so much debate today. The whole story really highlights the importance of critical thinking and why we need to look for treatments backed by solid evidence. We hope this detailed exploration has been helpful for you, giving you a clearer picture of the many sides to this complex topic.
And perhaps it raises a crucial question. In a world overflowing with health information, how do we figure out what's actually effective and safe? We believe starting with quality information is definitely the first step.
Definitely. So for everyone listening, maybe reflect on how the information we've discussed connects with your own experiences or what you already knew about homeopathy. What other questions has this dive sparked for you? Keep seeking knowledge and keep questioning. Until next time.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.